Section 1. The world before the world. Picture a man doing yoga, alone in his apartment, somewhere in Los Angeles in the spring of 2001. He is sweaty, it is late, his mind is wandering through ideas the way minds do when the body is occupied with something else. And somewhere in that wandering, something clicks. The man is Brian Konietzko, and the thing that clicks is not fully formed yet. It is more like a feeling, a shape, the outline of something that does not exist yet but should. He gets in his car, still sweaty, still buzzing with whatever this feeling is, and drives to his friend's house. No text first, no call. He just goes, because this is before cell phones, and because some things cannot wait. His friend is Michael DiMartino, and when Brian arrives and starts talking, starts sketching, starts explaining what he sees in his head, something remarkable happens. The two of them sit there and the idea gets bigger. It grows in the room between them, shaped by two different kinds of intelligence meeting in the dark. That night is where Avatar, the Last Airbender begins. Or rather, that night is where the last piece of it falls into place. Because the pieces had been accumulating for years. Both men had studied at the Rhode Island School of Design in the 1990s. Brian majoring in illustration, Michael in animation. They had built a friendship out of shared obsessions. Japanese anime, old kung fu films, epic fantasy stories, Eastern philosophy, the kind of obsessions that feel like preparation for something, even when you do not know what you are preparing for. After school, they both ended up in Los Angeles, both working in animation. Brian worked on Nickelodeon's cult series Invader Zim. Michael had spent time at Family Guy. They were learning the machinery of television production, accumulating the technical knowledge that would make their own idea possible, and all the while talking, sketching, dreaming something bigger than the things they were making. The sketch that Brian brings to that late-night meeting is of a bald, middle-aged man. He had made the sketch earlier, working with an older design he had lying around, and something about it caught his imagination. He redrew it younger. He drew this bald figure herding bison through the sky. And at the same moment, Michael had been watching a documentary about explorers trapped in the South Pole, isolated, the world pressing in on them, this vast white hostile landscape. The two ideas meet. An air person, and water people, and a snowy wasteland, and fire people pressing down from outside. From this, the pitch forms with almost shocking speed. Within 2 weeks, they are sitting across from Eric Coleman, a Nickelodeon executive who Brian had connected with during his time on Invader Zim. Brian spreads his sketches on the table. They talk. And the core idea, stripped to its bones, is so clear, so vivid, so structurally sound that Coleman sees it immediately. The show is greenlit, but here is the part that most people do not think about. The version that gets greenlit in 2001 is not yet Avatar as we know it. It is the outline of Avatar, the soul of Avatar. The show that would eventually become one of the most carefully constructed pieces of animated storytelling in television history still has to be built. And the building of it, the 3-year development period between pitch and premiere, is what separates Avatar from everything else around it. Most animated series do not get 3 years. They get a season Bible, some concept art, and a tight production schedule. Avatar got something rarer: time. Time to think. Time to research. Time to ask questions that the audience would never ask, and then build the answers into the fabric of every scene. What does each nation eat? What does each nation sound like? What does each nation's handwriting look like? How do you fight if you are blind? How does a boy carry 100 years of loss? The development period is when Brian Konietzko, who would become a student of martial arts consultant Sifu Kisu, first starts understanding how the bending system would really work. It is when the music begins to take shape in conversations about what instruments exist in the world. It is when the calligrapher is found, the cultural consultants are brought in, the architectural references are gathered. This is when the invisible architecture gets built. And the show that premieres on the 21st of February 2005 on a children's network between SpongeBob SquarePants and the Fairly Odd Parents carries all of that invisible architecture inside it. Every frame, whether anyone notices or not. Something worth sitting with, as you settle in and let the world get quiet around you, is this. The creators knew from the very beginning that the show would end. They pitched it as a 3-act story. They knew Aang would face Fire Lord Ozai. They knew the comet would return. They could see the end from the beginning, which meant that everything they built in Episode 1 was built in service of Episode 61. That kind of structural clarity is almost unheard of in American animation. Most shows are built one season at a time, hoping to survive long enough to tell a longer story. Avatar was designed the other way around. The ending came first, and the whole world was arranged around it. This is why the show's hidden details are so dense, so deliberate, so perfectly interlocking. The creators were not discovering the story as they told it. They were revealing it. Revealing a thing they had already completely imagined. And because they had imagined it completely, they could seed the early episodes with things that would not bloom for 2 more seasons. A glimpse of a lion turtle in a scroll. A phase of the moon that will matter in the finale. A character introduced as a hallucination before the audience has met them in the flesh. The depth you feel when you watch Avatar is not the depth of a show trying hard. It is the depth of a show that has already been through everything, that has already arrived at the end and knows where every piece goes. And there is something else worth saying about where Avatar comes from. Both Brian and Michael had a deep love for Studio Ghibli, the Japanese animation house founded by Hayao Miyazaki. The influence shows up in the big flying animal companion, in the sense of a world that is simultaneously beautiful and dangerous, in the way that wonder and weight coexist in the same frame. Appa, the sky bison, carries a clear echo of Miyazaki's cat bus from My Neighbor Totoro in his mass and his gentleness and his absolute reliability. Brian and Michael have acknowledged this debt openly, but the show they made out of that influence is entirely its own thing. The bones are borrowed, the flesh, the soul, the invisible architecture is entirely original. The show was also animated, primarily, in South Korea, at studios called JM Animation and DR Movie. This was standard practice for American animation at the time. What was not standard was the level of detail and creative control the American team maintained over that pipeline. The storyboards sent to Korea were more precise than anything those studios were used to receiving. Every lighting note, every emotional beat, every camera angle. The result was animation that felt authored in a way that most outsourced productions do not. You can feel the presence of an artistic vision in every scene, not because the execution is perfect, but because the intention is unmistakable. There is one more layer to the origin story that rarely gets discussed. The original fighting styles in the show were going to be invented, entirely fictional, made-up movements that looked bending appropriate but had no grounding in any real martial arts tradition. This was the initial plan. And then Brian Konietzko started taking kung fu lessons from a man named Sifu Kisu, and everything changed. Sifu Kisu looked at the elemental system and saw immediately that real martial arts could do more than invented ones. He understood, from a lifetime of practice, that each major Chinese martial arts tradition has its own philosophy of force and movement, its own understanding of what the body is for and how it relates to the world outside it. And he matched those philosophies to the elements with such precision that the result is not just visually distinctive but intellectually coherent. The bending styles are not just cool animations. They are arguments about how to live. This decision, made in the early development period, cascades through everything that follows. Because once you establish that water bending is philosophically Tai Chi, that earth bending is philosophically Hung Gar, then you have to think about what those philosophies imply for the cultures that produce them. What does a people who believe in yielding to force look like when they build cities, raise children, design clothing, cook food, tell stories? What does a people who believe in holding ground and never yielding look like when they go to war, organize their society, choose their leaders? The martial arts philosophy becomes cultural philosophy. The cultural philosophy becomes architecture and cuisine and music and the specific quality of grief each nation carries. Everything is connected. The world built during those 3 development years is the most interconnected fictional world in the history of American animation. Not the most elaborate, not the most geographically vast, the most interconnected. The bending styles connect to the cultures, connect to the music, connect to the architecture, connect to the food, connect to the governance structures, connect to the histories of conflict, connect to the individual character arcs. Every element of the world is in conversation with every other element. And the conversation was established during development, before a single episode was written, because the creators knew that you could not add this kind of coherence after the fact. It had to be the foundation. The show premiered, and most of the people watching it in February of 2005 had no idea what they were getting into. A 12-year-old named Aang emerges from an iceberg. He has blue arrows tattooed across his head and hands. He has a giant flying bison and a tiny flying lemur. He talks too fast and smiles too wide and cannot sit still. And underneath all of that energy, in the quieter spaces between the jokes and the adventure, there is something older and heavier. Something that has been asleep in the ice for 100 years. That weight is there from the very first episode. The show never loses it. And that, quietly, is the first secret. Not a production detail, not a behind-the-scenes fact, just the simplest truth about Avatar. It knew what it was before it began. And because it knew, it was able to be all of it, all at once, from the very first frame. Settle in. Let your breathing slow. Because this is a story about everything hidden inside a story you already love. And there is a lot more to find. Before we go any further, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. And if you are already watching this channel and have not subscribed yet, now is a good moment. It keeps this kind of content coming, and it means a lot. Section 2. The language beneath the language. There is a poster in the episode called The Ember Island Players. It advertises the play, and on it, rendered in brushed ink, is a column of Chinese characters that reads, The Boy in the Iceberg. Famous Earth Kingdom playwright Puan Tim's new work has collected information about the Avatar from around the globe, from the icebergs of the South Pole to the Earth Kingdom capital. Information comes from nomadic singers, pirates, war criminals, and vegetable merchants, performed by the Ember Island Players. You almost certainly watched that episode without being able to read that. Most viewers did. The text is clear and legible and grammatically correct and sits there on screen for maybe 3 seconds before the scene moves on. The person who wrote it was a Hong Kong-born biochemist named Dr. Su Leung Lee. Let that sit for a second. A biochemist. Writing detailed, accurate, brushed Chinese calligraphy for a wanted poster in a Nickelodeon cartoon. Because a children's animated series decided that the text in its world should be real. The decision to use genuine Chinese characters for all the written language in Avatar came early in development. Brian Konietzko made the call, and then he did what the Avatar team always did when they needed expertise. He looked for a real expert. An internet search brought him to Dr. Lee's website, Asia Wind, where Lee had been showcasing his calligraphic work since 1995. Konietzko sent a message explaining the project. Dr. Lee responded within an hour. And for the entirety of Avatar's 3-season run, and then through The Legend of Korra as well, Dr. Lee handled every piece of written text that appears in the Avatar world. Every scroll, every wanted poster, every shop sign, every banner, every inscription on temple walls, every note passed between characters, every label on a jar of tea, every piece of text in every background of every scene, all of it brushed by Dr. Lee in authentic, historically accurate Chinese calligraphy. He used different styles for different purposes. The main body of text in the show, street signs and official documents and merchant stalls, uses classical Chinese calligraphy written in the traditional top-to-bottom, right-to-left format. When the text appears in ancient contexts, on temple walls, or in the cave paintings of the Cave of Two Lovers, or inscribed on old spirit scrolls, Dr. Lee shifted to archaic styles, to seal script, to the older forms that predate the more modern calligraphic traditions. Ancient texts in the Avatar world look ancient because the person writing them knew what ancient Chinese script actually looks like. He even wrote the show's main title logo in calligraphy, the 4-character title that opens every episode. Real brushwork, not a font, not a traced version of a found calligraphic style. Original work. And the content of the writing is not placeholder text. It is not the equivalent of lorem ipsum, the nonsense text you see in design mock-ups. Dr. Lee wrote actual meaningful content for everything that was readable. The wanted posters have real bounty amounts and real descriptions. The scrolls contain real instructions or lore relevant to the scenes they appear in. The Pai Sho tiles have proper notation. The world map features a paraphrased quotation from the Analects of Confucius along its border. The books in Wan Shitong's library contain actual readable text about whatever subject the book purports to cover. The show is, in this sense, fully inhabited. Not just visually designed, but written, documented, as if someone actually lived in this world and left behind a paper trail. Now consider what it means that most viewers never notice this. The calligraphy is real, detailed, meaningful, and invisible to 99% of the audience. Dr. Lee knew this going in. The production team knew it, and they did it anyway. because the standard they held themselves to was not what the audience would notice, it was what was true. There is a concept in craft about what they call truth at every level. The idea that even the parts of a thing that cannot be seen or read or detected by the audience should be correct, should be real, should be honest, because the parts you cannot see are still felt. The invisible details are what give the visible details weight. When you feel that a world is real, when you feel that it has history and depth and laws that you have not been told, it is often because someone put real history and depth and laws into it at a level you cannot consciously access. Dr. Lee's calligraphy is one of the clearest examples of this in all of animation. Nobody watching Avatar in 2005 could read the text in the background. But those who could, those who came to the show with knowledge of traditional Chinese characters, found it completely legible. And because it was legible, because it was real, it produced a different effect from invented squiggles. The eye does not know that it is seeing real characters versus fake ones, but the brain processes real writing differently than it processes visual noise. Real calligraphy has rhythm and proportion, and a particular quality of intention that marks it as language. Even viewers who cannot read it register, somewhere below consciousness, that it is writing rather than decoration. This is the mechanism by which Avatar's invisible architecture works on you. Not through knowledge, through perception. You feel the world is real because the world was built as if it were real. And it extends beyond the calligraphy. The four nations have distinct writing personalities within the same language system. The Fire Nation, a militarized, bureaucratic state, uses a more angular and formal script style, appropriate for official documents and commands. The Earth Kingdom, with its ancient scholarly traditions and vast imperial history, uses a rounder and more ornate style, the script of a culture that has been keeping records for thousands of years. The Water Tribes, with their oral traditions and the practical reality of having to inscribe things into ice and bone rather than write them on paper, use a sparser style. The Air Nomad inscriptions, seen only in the temples and in the oldest parts of the world, use an archaic flowing form that suggests something very old, something written before the other nations had their current shape. One language. 4 distinct hands. 4 distinct cultures reaching through the same alphabet and revealing themselves in the way they hold the brush. This is what the M. Night Shyamalan film version of Avatar threw away. When Dr. Lee learned that the live-action film would not be using genuine Chinese calligraphy, but would instead replace all the written text with invented fantasy symbols, he released a public statement expressing his disappointment. He called it the removal of a successful cultural element. The film was, as most people know, a commercial and critical catastrophe. The calligraphy is not the reason for that. But the calligraphy's absence is symptomatic of the same thinking that produced everything else wrong with it. The assumption that the details do not matter, that the audience cannot tell the difference between authentic and approximate, between real and pretend. Avatar's creators always believed the opposite. The audience can tell. Not consciously, maybe, not in a way they can articulate, but they can tell. And the telling is exactly the feeling you get when you watch Avatar. That feeling of a world that is genuinely inhabited, genuinely old, genuinely real. The text you cannot read is telling you the truth. Dr. Lee, by the way, is also almost certainly responsible for many of the pun names and cultural references embedded in the character names throughout the show. Aang contains a Chinese word that suggests peaceful elevation or peaceful flight. Katara derives from a word meaning droplet. Toph, in Chinese, touches on meanings related to expansion and support. Zuko contains characters connected to ancestors. The names are not random or invented by sound. They are coded descriptions. Tiny brushstrokes of character written into the names themselves, legible only to those who know what to look for, and felt by everyone else as something intangibly right. This is what it means when people say Avatar is built with care. It means that the person who named the characters understood Chinese etymology. It means that the person who wrote the wanted posters wrote real text. It means that the invisible layer is as fully realized as the visible one. The world you see on screen is the surface of a much deeper world. And the deeper world goes all the way down. Let that thought carry you into the next section as the night gets quieter around you. Because we are just getting started. Section 3. The Body Remembers. Before Avatar existed as a television show, before a single frame had been drawn or a single line of dialogue recorded, before the music or the calligraphy or the world map, there was a man in a gymnasium in California demonstrating a fighting form. His name is Sifu Kisu. The word Sifu means teacher or master in Cantonese. It is the same title Aang uses to address Toph and Katara when they teach him their elements. And Sifu Kisu is the reason that every fight in Avatar feels like a real fight rather than a cartoon fight. He came into the project through Brian Konietzko. Brian had enrolled in Sifu Kisu's Kung Fu school, studying Northern Shaolin, one of the primary Chinese martial arts traditions. He was, by his own account, not especially talented, but he was a sincere student, and the teacher noticed that sincerity. And at some point during those lessons, Brian started explaining this animated show he was developing. This world built around 4 nations, each with their own elemental discipline. And he started asking Sifu Kisu what he thought. What happened next is one of those moments of genuine creative collision that you cannot plan for. Sifu Kisu did not just offer his opinion. He immediately saw the potential of the concept and started matching real martial arts traditions to the elements with a kind of philosophical precision that the creators had not yet imagined. He said that each martial art has its own philosophy, its own relationship to force and movement, and the body's relationship to space. And if you match the philosophy of the martial art to the philosophy of the element, you get something that is not just visually coherent, but spiritually coherent. The fighting style becomes an expression of how that culture understands the world. Airbending is based on Baguazhang. Bagua is defined by its circular footwork, its constant rotation, its refusal to meet force with force. A Bagua practitioner is always moving, always circling, always eluding. The style was developed to fight multiple opponents, to keep the practitioner in motion so that no single attacker can pin them down. When Aang fights, he does not block. He is not there. He was somewhere else the whole time, and now he is somewhere else again. He skims and pivots and floats and the enemy swings at air, which is exactly right because he is an airbender. Bagua's philosophy is that the best defense is never being where the attack lands. This is also air nomad philosophy. Non-violence not as weakness but as the ultimate expression of mastery over confrontation. Waterbending is based on Tai Chi. This is the most widely recognized of the 4 martial arts to Western audiences, though what most people know as Tai Chi is the slow, meditative form practiced in parks by older practitioners. The combat applications of Tai Chi are far more vigorous. The philosophy is redirection, the principle that you never oppose force directly, but instead receive it, yield to it, and turn it back on itself. Sifu Kisu described Tai Chi as less about strength and more about alignment, body structure, breath, and visualization. This is exactly the philosophy of waterbending. Water does not resist what presses against it. It accepts the force and moves with it, and finds a way around. Katara in a fight is not opposing the Fire Nation. She is redirecting it. She is turning Zuko's aggression into the mechanism of his own defeat. Earthbending is based on Hung-Gar, a southern Chinese martial art that traces its roots to the destruction of the Shaolin Temple during the Ming Dynasty. Hung-Gar is characterized by low stances that seem almost impossibly deep, by strikes that come from the whole body rather than just the arms, by a fundamental commitment to holding ground. Where a Bagua practitioner circles and a Tai Chi practitioner yields, a Hung-Gar practitioner stands. They root, they absorb, they wait, and when they move with the weight of everything behind them. Sifu Kisu himself favored Hung-Gar's low horse stance demonstrations, thinking about how if someone could just stomp down hard enough, a chunk of earth would leap up for them to drive into an attacker's face. The earthbender's fighting stance, that wide-legged, grounded, immovable posture, is pulled directly from Hung-Gar's forms. Firebending is based on Northern Shaolin, which happens to be the style Sifu Kisu spent his career teaching. Northern Shaolin is everything that Hung-Gar is not. Where Hung-Gar stands still, Northern Shaolin surges forward. Its techniques are designed to drive through the opponent, not around them, not past them, through them. Practitioners of Northern Shaolin are taught to imagine their strikes penetrating forward for 1,000 miles. The style uses wide aggressive stances, high kicking techniques, acrobatic movements, and an overall energy of relentless forward pressure. When Zuko fights, especially in the earlier seasons when he is still defined by aggression and pride, he is not tactically sophisticated. He presses forward, he extends, he attacks. This is Northern Shaolin applied to fire. And it is also, quietly, a commentary on his character. He fights the way the Fire Nation thinks, with overwhelming forward force, with the assumption that intensity equals victory. Now here is something remarkable. Sifu Kisu filmed himself performing these martial arts forms. He recorded his demonstrations on video, and those recordings were sent to the animation studios in South Korea as frame-by-frame reference. The animators were not inventing the movement. They were tracing real human bodies doing real martial arts. This is why the bending in Avatar looks different from the fighting in other animated series. Most animated fighting is designed by storyboard artists imagining what looks cool. Avatar's fighting was designed by a martial arts master demonstrating what is real. The animation team then adapted and exaggerated for the medium. But the bones, the footwork, the weight distribution, the timing of breath to movement, all of it comes from Sifu Kisu's demonstrations. And then there is Toph. Toph's earthbending is based on southern praying mantis kung fu. This is a completely separate martial art from Hung Gar, despite both being southern Chinese styles. The decision to give Toph a different foundation was deliberate and deeply considered. Hung Gar's signature low horse stances require a wide, stable base and a particular relationship to the ground that assumes the practitioner can see where they are standing and what they are confronting. Toph cannot see. She is blind. And she is also small and compact in a way that does not suit Hung Gar's wide, powerful forms. Southern praying mantis is a different animal entirely. It is a compact style with lower and more inward-facing stances. It emphasizes sensitivity, the ability to feel the opponent's intention through contact rather than sight. Practitioners of southern praying mantis develop an acute awareness of the energy flowing between two bodies in contact. They detect and redirect rather than oppose. This is exactly how Toph bends. Her seismic sense, her ability to feel the world through vibrations in the earth, is the bending equivalent of southern praying mantis sensitivity. She does not need to see the rock to bend it. She feels it. And her fighting style reflects this. If you watch Toph fight and then watch any other earthbender in the show fight, the difference is visible and measurable. She moves differently. Her footwork is tighter. Her forms are more compact. Her relationship to the ground is not about power and mass in the Hung Gar sense, but about contact and sensitivity. She has different hands on the same element. The moment that really shows this is in her introduction episode, The Blind Bandit, when she effortlessly defeats the boulder despite his enormous size and conventional earthbending skill. She defeats him not by being stronger, but by feeling his attacks before they arrive and redirecting them. She uses his force. This is southern praying mantis logic applied to earthbending. And there is one more layer to this that the show handles with extraordinary elegance. When Iroh tells Zuko in Book 2 that he invented lightning redirection by studying waterbenders, this is not just a plot point. The animation reflects it. When Iroh or Zuko redirects lightning, watch the movement they use. It is a Tai Chi form, not a Northern Shaolin form. The animators physically changed the martial arts style mid-technique to demonstrate that the character is drawing on a different discipline. The lightning enters through one hand, travels through the body following the torso's energy pathways, and exits through the other hand. The path it takes through the body mirrors the energy redirection principles of waterbending. In less than 2 seconds of screen time, the animation is showing you a philosophical breakthrough by expressing it through choreography. This is what Sifu Kisu brought to Avatar. Not just cool-looking fights, a complete system in which the way a character moves tells you who they are, where they come from, and how they understand the world. You can read the politics and the philosophy of the Avatar universe in the bodies of its fighters. The Fire Nation surges forward because it believes in overwhelming force. The Water Tribe yields and redirects because it understands that force is temporary and flow is permanent. The Earth Kingdom stands and holds because it believes in the permanence of what is beneath your feet. The Air Nomads move in circles because they believe that no conflict needs a winner, only a resolution. 4 philosophies, 4 bodies, 4 ways of being in the world, all built by one man in a gymnasium in California, performing forms on camera, being watched by animators who turned his body into something that would be felt by millions of people who would never know his name. Let your body settle into wherever it is resting right now. Feel the weight of yourself against whatever is beneath you. That weight, that rootedness, is the first lesson of earthbending. Section 4. The Sound of 4 Nations. The first time you hear Avatar: The Last Airbender's music, you hear something that does not quite match any reference point you already have. If you grew up watching American animation, you might expect something orchestral and sweeping. the kind of score that tells you clearly when to feel excited or sad or triumphant. Avatar's score does not do that. It does something stranger and, ultimately, more affecting. It sounds like nothing else. It sounds like the show's world, rather than like movies set in the show's world. The composer is Jeremy Zuckerman, one half of a duo called The Track Team, alongside sound designer Benjamin Wynn. Zuckerman was studying at CalArts for graduate school when he met Wynn, who was in the undergraduate program. They built a working relationship there that would eventually lead both of them to Avatar. And when the creators of the show approached potential composers, they were explicit about what they did not want. They did not want someone who was already an established animation composer. They wanted something new, something that sounded like it was coming from the world rather than commenting on it. Zuckerman spent considerable time learning from musicians experienced with Chinese instruments. He immersed himself in the sounds of East Asian music, not to pastiche them, not to create a generic Asian-sounding score, but to understand them from the inside well enough to use them with real intentionality. And what he arrived at is one of the most carefully differentiated musical scores in the history of animated television. Each nation has its own sonic palette, and these are not cosmetic differences. They are rooted in the actual instrumental traditions of the cultures that each nation draws from. The Water Tribe's music uses the duduk. This is an Armenian wind instrument, ancient in origin, with one of the most mournful and beautiful sounds in the entire world of music. It has a quality of immense human sadness, of something carried a very long distance. The duduk became the avatar for the in-show instrument called the sungi horn, and it threads through every Water Tribe scene, every Arctic landscape, every moment of loss or separation that connects to the northern or southern poles. The choice of the duduk is interesting because it is not actually a Chinese instrument at all. Zuckerman made this choice because the show's Water Tribes are drawn from circumpolar indigenous cultures, Inuit and Yupik and Sireniki peoples, and the duduk's particular quality of desolation and beauty matched the emotional landscape of those cultures better than anything else in his arsenal. The Earth Kingdom reaches for the Chinese classical tradition. The guzheng, which is a plucked zither with a warm and ancient sound. The pipa, a lute-like instrument with a more complex and expressive range. The erhu, a two-stringed bowed instrument that can produce sounds uncannily close to a human voice, with all the vulnerability that implies. When you are in Ba Sing Se, when you are walking through the Earth Kingdom's vast and ancient landscapes, the music beneath you is built from instruments that have been played in China for thousands of years. The sound is old because the culture it is representing is old. The Fire Nation uses taiko drums and brass. The taiko, large Japanese ceremonial drums, produce a sound of overwhelming physical force, a sound that you feel in your chest rather than just hearing with your ears. This is a Fire Nation sound. Not subtle, not ancient, but powerful and immediate and very hard to ignore. The brass instruments add a quality of industrial formality, of a culture that has weaponized ceremony. The Fire Nation's music does not invite you, it commands. The air nomads, heard only in flashbacks and in the brief, heartbreaking moments when their temples are visited and their absence is felt, are scored with Tibetan singing bowls and bamboo flutes. The singing bowls produce a sound that seems to come from nowhere in particular, from the air itself, from the space between things. The bamboo flutes are light and slightly breathy, connected to the element in the most literal possible way. When you hear air nomad music, it sounds like something that has already been gone for a very long time. It sounds like memory, like an echo of something that was once the most alive thing in the world and is now just its trace. Zuckerman performed and recorded many of the non-Western instruments himself. The orchestral instruments were MIDI, meaning they were synthesized from digital samples, because the budget and timeline did not allow for a full orchestra. But for most of the show's run, Zuckerman was essentially working alone, recording the duduk and the pipa and the guzheng and the various flutes himself, building the score instrument by instrument. The constraints were significant. MIDI has a known problem called the machine gun effect. If you play the same note twice in succession from the same sample, the repetition sounds mechanical, unnatural. Zuckerman had to score around these limitations constantly, finding ways to maintain the music's organic feel within tight technical restrictions. For the series finale, Sozin's Comet, he was finally given the resources to record live strings for the first time. Just those 4 episodes. The rest of the show's 72 total episodes of content, including The Legend of Korra, were scored without a live string section. And yet, the music feels alive throughout. Because Zuckerman understood something essential. The emotional truth of music does not depend on the size of the ensemble. It depends on the specificity of the intention. There is one piece of music that stands entirely apart. The song performed by Iroh in The Tales of Ba Sing Se, an episode from Book 2. The title of the song translates roughly as Leaves from the Vine. Iroh sings it alone, quietly, at a small memorial he has set up for his dead son, Lu Ten, whose birthday it is. The song is gentle and simple and absolutely devastating. It is performed not as a formal production number but as a private act, a man alone with his grief, singing to his child who cannot hear him. The performance was recorded by Mako Iwamatsu, the voice actor who played Iroh for the first 2 seasons of the show. Mako had been ill during the final recordings of Book 2, battling esophageal cancer. He died on the 21st of July 2006, at age 72. The Tales of Ba Sing Se aired in September 2006, approximately 2 months after his death. The dedication card at the end of the episode reads simply, "In honor of Mako, Greg Baldwin stepped in to voice Iroh for Book 3 and for The Legend of Korra. He studied Mako's performance with extraordinary care, matching the cadence and warmth and the specific quality of weight that Mako brought to the character. The transition between the 2 voices happens between seasons, and the vast majority of viewers do not notice it. Baldwin himself has said publicly that he will never perform Leaves from the Vine. The song is Mako's. It belongs to the man who sang it at the end of his life. And here's the thing about that song that sits with you, once you know it. Iroh in that scene is an old man singing to his dead son. He is at peace with his grief. He has not resolved it, but he has learned to carry it. And the man performing that scene was himself dying, and somehow he found the voice for exactly this, for the particular quality of grief that has been lived with long enough to be expressed as a song. The performance did not require acting. It required only honesty. This is the kind of moment that Avatar produces when all of its layers converge. The story, the character, the music, the voice, the real human life behind the voice. All of it becoming one thing for 3 minutes of a children's cartoon. A thing so particular and true that it has made millions of adults cry for 2 decades, many of them not fully understanding why. The music of Avatar is not background. It is another form of language, as deliberate and as specific as the calligraphy, as the martial arts, as the color of fire. It is telling you where you are and how to feel about it, and what is at stake. And it does this in 4 different languages, one for each nation, and sometimes all 4 at once. When Aang enters the Avatar state, the 4 musical palettes converge, all 4 nations, in sound, occupying the same body. This is the music showing you what the narrative is telling you. That the Avatar is not one person. That the Avatar is everyone. Section 5. The Architecture of Souls. Imagine a team of animators, sometime around 2002 or 2003, making a decision about how to frame a character's face. The character is Prince Zuko. He has a burn scar that covers the left side of his face, the legacy of a punishment his own father inflicted on him when he was 13 years old, when he refused to fight in a duel, and Ozai decided that this was disrespect that needed to be burned away. The scar is the most prominent physical feature of the show's most complex character, and the production team decided that it was not just a design element, it was a storytelling tool. The rule is quiet and consistent across all 3 seasons. In scenes where Zuko is operating from anger, from shame, from the identity that Ozai tried to impose on him, the camera tends to favor his scarred side. He is framed from the left. The damaged face is what you see. In scenes where Zuko is showing growth, vulnerability, compassion, or honesty, the camera shifts to show the unscarred side. The clean right profile is what fills the frame. This is not a hard rule that holds in every single shot. It is a tendency, a pattern, a visual shorthand that the storyboard artists developed to support the character's psychological arc. But once you notice it, once someone points it out, you start to see it everywhere. You start reading the camera angle as information about which version of Zuko you are watching. The damaged half and the whole half, shown to you by the show's choice of where to put the camera. The scar is the show's most visible use of what filmmakers sometimes call visual subtext, meaning the way an image communicates something that the dialogue is not saying. But it is far from the only one. Consider Toph's sleeping position. In almost every camping scene across the 3 seasons, whenever Team Avatar settles down for the night, Toph props her feet up against a rock, against a raised mound of earth, against a wall. Her feet are elevated off the ground. The show never explains this. No character ever points it out. It just happens. Episode after episode, in scene after scene, a tiny consistent detail in the background of scenes that are about other things. Toph's primary sense is seismic. She feels the world through vibrations in the earth, transmitted through the soles of her feet. Her feet are her eyes. They are extraordinarily sensitive, tuned by years of earthbending training to detect the specific weight and movement of everything within range. And this means that when her feet are touching the ground while she is trying to sleep, she is effectively trying to sleep with her eyes open, except worse, because the earth sends her constant information about every footstep, every animal movement, every insect within her sensing range. Lifting her feet off the ground is the equivalent of closing her eyes. It is how she turns the world off. The animators built this into the show because they thought it through. They asked, what does it actually mean to be Toph? What does it feel like to have the world constantly talking to you through your feet? And the answer produced this small, recurring, never commented upon detail that rewards careful watching with one of those moments of quiet recognition. Of course she does that. It could not be any other way. This is the philosophy that underlies all of Avatar's visual design choices. Not just what looks good, but what is true. What would actually be the case, given who this person is and how their world works. The color theory follows the same logic. Each nation has a dominant palette. Fire Nation red, Earth Kingdom green, Water Tribe blue, Air Nomad orange and yellow. This is the visible layer, the one most viewers register consciously. But the show uses color at a much more granular level. During Book 2, as Zuko travels through the Earth Kingdom in exile, living in Fire Nation colors would be dangerous and also emotionally false. He is not that person right now. He is trying to be someone else. And the animation reflects this by gradually integrating Earth Kingdom greens into his wardrobe and surroundings. His clothing changes. The settings he moves through are dominated by greens and browns. He is, visually, being absorbed by the Earth Kingdom, becoming part of a world that is not his home, which is also the thematic point of his Book 2 arc. When he returns to the Fire Nation in Book 3, the Reds come back. But they are different Reds, darker, more muted, less triumphant. The Fire Nation no longer feels like home, and the color palette registers this. The Reds of Book 1 are vivid and aggressive. The Reds of Book 3, in the scenes with Zuko, are shadowed and complicated. His relationship to the color of his own nation has changed, and so has the color itself. Azula's fire is blue. This is the most direct and also the most layered of the show's color choices. Blue fire burns hotter than orange fire. This is real thermodynamics. The show is using the literal science of combustion to tell you, in color, that Azula's firebending is more intense, more refined, and more dangerous than anything else you will see in the series. She is the only character in the original series whose fire burns blue. It is a visual shorthand for her exceptional power. And then, in the finale, as Azula begins to fracture under the weight of her own perfectionism, and her mother's absence, and her fundamental inability to form real human connections, her fire starts to change. It becomes erratic. It flickers between blue and orange. Sometimes in the middle of a single shot, the color of her flame shifts. Her fire is literally unstable because she is unstable. The color of her power is showing you the failure of her psychology in real time. The design of the show's environments follows a similar logic of grounded reference. The air temples are modeled on Tibetan cliff monasteries, on places like Tiger's Nest in Bhutan, where monastic communities have clung to vertical rock faces for centuries. The Northern Water Tribe's ice city draws from Venetian canal architecture, that particular urban logic of life organized around water channels, transposed into a landscape of sculpted ice. The Earth Kingdom's imperial architecture references the Forbidden City in Beijing, that specific quality of vast enclosed spaces organized around hierarchy and ritual. The Fire Nation's design pulls from Japanese and Southeast Asian temple architecture, with industrial elements added to suggest the particular relationship between military power and technological advancement. The production team traveled, they researched, they looked at real places and asked themselves how those places would look if they had been built by a people with these particular resources and these particular values. The buildings in Avatar are not generic fantasy architecture. They are specific answers to specific cultural and geographic questions. And there is Aang's body. His blue arrow tattoos do not trace a decorative pattern. They follow the chi pathways of the human body as understood in traditional Chinese and Hindu systems of energy medicine. The arrows on his limbs follow the flow of life force from the extremities toward the center. The arrow on his head points to the crown, the seventh chakra in the Hindu system, associated with cosmic consciousness and spiritual connection. His body is a map of spiritual energy. The tattoos are, literally, acupuncture charts rendered in blue on a 12-year-old boy's skin. When he moves into the avatar state and those arrows glow, the show is not just depicting the activation of his power, it is showing you the energy pathways lighting up, the chi flowing in the channels that the tattoos trace, the whole spiritual system of his culture made visible on his body, and even the way he moves when he is not bending. Watch Aang run across the screen. His footfalls are lighter than other characters. His contact with the ground is briefer. His movement has a quality of barely touching the surface world, of a person who belongs more to the air than to the earth. The animators gave him a unique locomotion cycle. He skims, he almost floats. Even in an ordinary chase scene, his body is reminding you of what element he was born into. There is something worth noticing about how Avatar handles the physical changes that mark emotional transitions, because it is a language the show speaks constantly and almost nobody consciously tracks. Zuko's hair is the most elaborate example. In Book 1, he wears the traditional top knot of a Fire Nation prince, the style that marks his status and his allegiance and his relationship to his father's vision of who he should be. At the beginning of Book 2, on the run and in exile, he cuts it off. The cutting is not shown as a dramatic moment. He simply has shorter, messier hair the next time you see him. Unadorned, unplaceable. A person without a nation visible on their head. Through Book 2, his hair grows out in the unkempt way of someone who has stopped caring about how they look to the people who used to define their worth. It is the hair of a refugee, of someone living in the margins of a world that no longer has a designated place for them. When he returns to the Fire Nation at the start of Book 3, the top knot returns, he has put the symbol back on. He is trying to go back to what he was, and the hair is telling you, before the plot confirms it, that this return is not a homecoming. It is an attempt, and attempts fail. By the end of the show, his hair is loose and simple, not the formal top knot of a prince, not the neglected growth of a refugee, something natural, something chosen, the hair of a person who has finally decided for themselves what they look like. This is a character arc told in hair. The show does not point at it. It simply keeps putting Zuko on screen and allowing his hair to tell you where he is in his journey. Katara's development is tracked through the quality and scale of her bending across 61 episodes. In the first episode of Book 1, she bends a small sphere of water from under a layer of ice and holds it for a few seconds before it splashes across Aang's face. This is the full extent of her ability. One small sphere of water, imperfectly controlled. By the end of Book 3, she can generate massive flowing constructions, can bend in combat simultaneously with offense and defense, can heal grievous injuries, and can face Azula, the most powerful firebender in the show, as a genuine equal. The animators tracked her progress specifically. The scale of what she bends grows, the precision improves, the fluidity becomes something that the early season Katara could not have imagined. This kind of developmental continuity is rare in animation. Most shows keep characters at approximately the same power level for narrative convenience, slightly better when the episode requires it, but without a consistent arc of genuine growth. Avatar builds its protagonists' competence as carefully as it builds their characters, and tracks the physical expression of that growth through animation. The same is true of Aang's Avatar state. In Book 1, the Avatar state is something that happens to Aang. It activates without his choosing it, in moments of extreme danger. And when it does, he is inside it rather than in control of it. The glowing eyes and arrows that activate are not his eyes. He is the vehicle for something much larger. By the finale, he has learned to enter the Avatar state with some intention, though never complete control. And the quality of the light when he achieves his full power against Ozai is different from the quality of the light in Book 1. It is steadier, more focused, the same phenomenon, expressed through a body that has grown into it rather than being overwhelmed by it. These are the details that make Avatar's world feel inhabited rather than designed. A world where the bodies tell the same story as the plot, where the colors are arguing with you about the character's inner states, where a sleeping position is a piece of characterization, where fire changes color when a person starts to lose their mind, where hair length is biography, where the scale of a water sphere measures 3 seasons of work and will. The architecture of the Avatar world is built from the inside out. Character first, then design. Soul first, then body. Meaning first, then image. Section 6. The Spirit World's Hidden Logic. There is a moment in Book 2 when the animation style changes. It is subtle enough that most viewers feel it before they register it. The colors shift, the outlines soften, the backgrounds lose their geographical specificity and become something more painterly, more abstracted. The world stops being a place you could draw on a map and becomes a place made of feeling. You are in the spirit world. The production team developed a distinct visual grammar for the spirit world across all 3 seasons, and it operates on consistent rules that you absorb without being told. The spirit world is saturated with impossible colors, colors that nature produces in extreme moments, the specific blue-green of deep water or the warm orange-gold of late afternoon light, but pushed past the point where they feel natural. Everything is a little too much, too vivid or too washed out, too lush or too empty. The spirit world is a place of essence, not of matter, and its visual language communicates this through the particular quality of its wrongness. The spirit world's cosmology is not invented wholesale. It draws from animistic traditions that have existed across dozens of cultures for thousands of years, the belief that the natural world is not inert, but conscious, not backdrop, but participant, that rivers and mountains and fire and ocean have not just physical properties but personalities, histories, intentions. In the Avatar world, the ocean and the moon are 2 fish. They are the oldest spirits to have crossed from the spirit world into the physical world, taking mortal form. They have been swimming in the spirit oasis at the North Pole for longer than any human civilization can remember. Tui and La, the moon and the ocean, circle each other in a perfect yin and yang pattern. A white fish with a dark spot. A dark fish with a white spot. They form the Taijutsu, the familiar yin-yang symbol, continuously, in real time, in a small pool at the edge of the world. This is not metaphorical. In the Avatar world, the yin-yang symbol is 2 living creatures. The philosophical symbol has been literalized. The ancient Chinese concept of complementary dualities, of the way opposing forces are actually expressions of a single underlying wholeness, has been given flesh and gills and an actual location in the geography of the world. And because they are real, they can be killed. This is what Admiral Zhao does at the siege of the North Pole, killing the moon spirit in an act that briefly extinguishes the moon itself, robbing the water tribe of their bending at their most desperate moment. The philosophical and the physical are the same thing in this world. To attack the symbol is to attack the reality it represents. The lion turtle that gives Aang the knowledge of energy bending in the finale does not appear out of nowhere. It has been present in the world's visual vocabulary for seasons. In Book 2, a scroll in Wan Shi Tong's library depicts a lion turtle in a fleeting background shot. In Book 3, a carving of a lion turtle is visible on a wall in the Fire Nation's underground bunker during the Day of Black Sun sequence. These appearances last a few frames each. They were confirmed as intentional foreshadowing by the creators. The lion turtle exists in the world's mythology before it becomes relevant to the plot. When it finally surfaces in the finale, it is not a deus ex machina. It is the full emergence of something that was always there, waiting at the deep ocean floor. This is the consistent logic of the spirit world's hidden architecture. The spirits in Avatar do not behave according to human morality. They are not good or evil in the way that human characters are. They are powerful forces with their own natures and their own rules. Wan Shi Tong, the spirit who owns the library, does not let the heroes use the knowledge they gather against any nation, because knowledge is not a weapon in his understanding of the world. He is not a villain. He is a spirit operating from spirit logic, which runs parallel to human logic but does not always intersect with it. The show researched the actual cosmologies of the traditions it was drawing from. The chakra system that Guru Pathak teaches Aang in Book 2, the 7 energy centers that run through the body and correspond to different aspects of consciousness, is drawn directly from Hindu and Buddhist traditions. The show presents them accurately. The earth chakra at the base of the spine, associated with survival, blocked by fear. The water chakra in the sacrum, associated with pleasure, blocked by guilt. The fire chakra in the stomach, associated with willpower, blocked by shame. The heart chakra, blocked by grief. the sound chakra, blocked by lies, the light chakra, blocked by illusion, the thought chakra at the crown, blocked by earthly attachment. These are the actual chakras from actual tradition, presented with the appropriate associations and blockages. A child who watched those episodes and then, years later, encountered chakra philosophy in an actual yoga class or a Buddhist text would recognize the system. They would have already been introduced to it. The show planted the familiarity before they had the language. And the concept of qi, of life energy flowing through pathways in the body, underlies the entire bending system. It is why Ty Lee's qi blocking works. She is not attacking muscles or bones. She is attacking the energy pathways, disrupting the flow of qi that makes bending possible. The techniques she uses, pressing specific points on the body to disrupt energy flow, correspond to real acupressure points. The show researched the actual locations of pressure points on the human body and adapted them into Ty Lee's fighting style. The spiritual geography of the Avatar world follows a logic of resonance. High places are closer to the air nomad's spiritual tradition. Deep water is where the ocean spirit lives, and water has the strongest pull. The swamp in the Earth Kingdom is a place where the spiritual and physical worlds are unusually thin between each other, where the giant banyan grove tree has connected every plant in the swamp into a single organism. This is not invented biology. Banyan trees in the real world can spread over enormous areas through their root systems and aerial roots. And certain real-world tree populations, like the Pando aspen grove in Utah, are technically single organisms connected by underground root networks, covering over 100 acres. The Foggy Swamp tribe's belief that the entire swamp is one living thing is grounded in genuine botany. The spirit world and the physical world are not separate in Avatar's cosmology. They overlap. The thinning of the boundary between them is what produces certain unusual phenomena. The Foggy Swamp's visions, the oasis at the North Pole, the high-altitude spiritual sensitivity of the air temples. The world has spiritual geography, places where the membrane between levels of reality is thicker or thinner. This is the kind of world-building that the show does in the background, never explaining, never underlining, trusting that the internal consistency will be felt even where it is not understood. The spirit world looks different from the physical world because it operates differently, because it follows the logic of emotion and essence rather than matter and physics. And within that difference, it is consistent. It follows its own rules with the same fidelity that the physical world follows its rules. When Aang enters the spirit world, he is always vulnerable in ways that his avatar power cannot protect him from. The spirit world does not care about his status. He is just another consciousness here, navigating according to emotional and spiritual principles rather than physical ones. This is, again, philosophically accurate to the traditions the show draws from. In Buddhist and Hindu frameworks, spiritual development is precisely about learning to navigate a dimension of experience that physical strength and conventional intelligence cannot address. The avatar state is useless in the spirit world in the same way that muscles are useless in a dream. These layers sit inside the show very quietly. Most children watching Avatar in 2005 absorbed them as adventure elements, as cool world-building details. And they were right too. That is what the details are on the surface. But underneath the surface, they are gestures toward real systems of thought that millions of people have used to understand consciousness, nature, and the relationship between human life and the larger life of the world. The spirit world is where Avatar makes its most ambitious reach, and it does so while making sure that the reach looks like just another exciting setting. Section 7. The Wars That Already Happened. The Fire Nation is not a fantasy villain empire, it is a portrait. This is perhaps the most significant hidden layer in Avatar's design, the one that operates most deeply beneath the surface of the adventure story and does the most work on the audience without their conscious awareness. The Fire Nation is a portrait of how real imperial powers have actually behaved in recorded history, and the show researched that history with the same care it brought to the martial arts and the calligraphy. The most visible parallel is between the Fire Nation and Imperial Japan. The architecture, the military aesthetic, the hierarchical structure of the royal family, the concept of honor as something that can be demanded at sword point, the aggressive naval expansion, the industrialization deployed in service of conquest. The early design work for the Fire Nation was, by the creator's own account, explicitly Japanese-influenced. The designs were later made somewhat more broadly Pan-Asian to avoid placing too much of the weight of the show's critique on any single real culture. But the Japanese parallel remains the strongest, and the show does not hide it. The Fire Nation's century of war mirrors the pattern of Japanese imperialism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The expansion into Korea, Manchuria, Taiwan, the series of conflicts that culminated in the Second World War, the air nomad genocide, the systematic elimination of an entire people and their culture, echoes historical atrocities that the show's creators were aware of and thinking about when they built the world. But the show does not present this as a simple indictment of the Fire Nation people. This is the crucial distinction. Ozai is monstrous. Long Feng and the Dai Li are corrupt. But the Fire Nation civilians, the ordinary people going about their lives in the schools and the tea shops and the small towns, are not shown as evil. They are shown as people who have been told a story by their government, a story in which the Fire Nation is bringing prosperity and progress to the world, and who largely believe that story because they have been told nothing else. Book 3, when Aang and his friends go undercover in the Fire Nation, is the most important section of the show for this reason. It is when the audience is made to see the Fire Nation from the inside. The school episode, The Headband, shows a classroom where children are taught nationalist propaganda as history, where art is limited to approved subjects, where dancing has been banned as a frivolous distraction. The children in that classroom are not villains. They are kids who are being raised inside a lie, and they do not know it is a lie, because lies told from childhood feel like facts. The connection to historical reality was deliberate. The creators researched propaganda techniques and educational control systems used by real authoritarian regimes. The specific method used by the Dai Li to brainwash Jet in the Lake Laogai episode, repetitive phrases delivered in darkness while a light source creates a hypnotic focal point, draws from documented techniques of coercive persuasion. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. The phrase has become one of the most quoted lines from the show precisely because it resonates beyond the fiction. Because the denial of observable reality as a political tool is not an Avatar invention. It is a historical pattern. The Dai Li themselves have a direct historical parallel. The show's scholarly community has identified them as corresponding to the Blue Shirt Society, a Chinese secret police organization affiliated with Chiang Kai-shek's government in the 1930s. Both organizations were originally created with legitimate purposes of cultural preservation and order, and both became instruments of surveillance, control, and political violence. The Dai Li were founded by Avatar Kyoshi to protect Ba Sing Se's culture during a period of civil unrest. By the time of the show, they have become Long Feng's private police force, using the tools of cultural protection to enforce cultural silence. Ba Sing Se itself is modeled on Imperial Beijing, with its concentric rings of decreasing privilege. The outer wall, the lower ring, the middle ring, the upper ring, and at the center, the palace and the oblivious Earth King. This is not just aesthetic. It is a model of class stratification embedded in urban design, a city where your status is literally expressed by how close to the center you are allowed to live. The show depicts this not through lectures but through production design. As Team Avatar moves inward through Ba Sing Se, the buildings become grander, the streets become cleaner, the people dress better. The camera shows you class inequality the way cities actually show it, through space and architecture and the visible quality of everything. The Fire Nation's technology, its ironclad ships and war balloons and mechanical drills, represents the relationship between industrialization and imperialism that has characterized real-world historical conflicts. No other nation in Avatar has this level of mechanized technology because no other nation has dedicated its national development so completely to the project of military conquest. The Fire Nation's innovation is not evil in itself. The resources, the engineering talent, the organizational capacity that built those war machines could have built something else. The show makes this point quietly in Book 3, when we see Fire Nation civilians who are creative and talented and trapped inside a system that has decided their creativity belongs to the war. The Southern Water Tribe's decline is handled with particular care and sadness. In Book 1, the tribe is a handful of elderly people and children huddled around a small cluster of tents on the ice. The men are away fighting. The waterbenders are gone. Katara is the last one, and the show establishes, through background dialogue and implication, that this is because the Fire Nation systematically raided the Southern Tribe for decades with a specific goal: eliminate the waterbenders. Not the tribe, just the benders. Cultural decapitation, removing the spiritual and martial leadership of a people to render them helpless. The tribe's diminished state in Book 1 is the result of a targeted, sustained campaign of persecution that the show never depicts directly. You see only the aftermath. The empty tents where a civilization used to live. The show's treatment of imperialism as a system, rather than as a collection of individual villains, is its most sophisticated political achievement. Ozai is the final boss, but the show is careful not to let his defeat stand in for the defeat of everything he represents. Zuko's first act as Fire Lord is to declare the war over and commit to healing the damage. But the healing is acknowledged as a process that will take generations. The century of war has left marks that a single coronation cannot erase. The show is honest about this. It does not pretend that defeating the symbolic leader of an imperial system undoes the system. There is a detail in the Fire Nation school episode, The Headband, that I want to spend a moment on specifically because it is the show at its most quietly devastating. Aang infiltrates the school and sits in a classroom where the teacher begins a history lesson. The lesson is about the war, and in the Fire Nation's version of history, the war is a generous gift. The other nations had been in chaos. The Fire Nation, with its superior technology and its single vision and its enlightened leadership, stepped in to bring order and unity. The Fire Nation is the hero of this story. The Avatar is the obstacle to progress. The air nomads were dangerous radicals who had to be neutralized. Every word of this is a lie that has been told so many times it has become geography. It is built into the walls of the classroom, into the books the students hold, into the tests they will be graded on, into the version of themselves they are constructing by believing it. Aang sits in that classroom and hears the story of himself told by the people who destroyed his world, and the story they tell is that they were right to do what they did, and the children around him believe it because they have never been given a reason not to. The moment is not played for horror. It is played very quietly, with Aang's small, controlled expression of someone receiving information he does not know how to process. This is how the show depicts the deepest damage of imperialism. Not the battles or the borders or the theft of resources. The story. The narrative that an occupying power tells about itself, that makes its violence into heroism and its victims into the problem. The show understands that you can win a war and lose the story, and losing the story is the longer damage. Zuko understands this at the end. His first acts as Fire Lord include withdrawing from conquered territories and beginning reparations. But the harder work, the work that a single coronation cannot accomplish, is changing the story the Fire Nation tells about itself. The propaganda does not end when Ozai falls. 100 years of national mythology does not dissolve in a day. The show is honest about this even in the lightness of its finale. The peace is real. The work is just beginning. And this is one of the ways that Avatar treats its young audience with genuine respect. It does not pretend that defeat of the symbolic villain means defeat of the system. It shows you the system's depth by showing you the classroom, the propaganda, the architecture of belief that an empire builds to sustain itself. And it trusts the young viewer to understand what they are seeing, not to articulate it in academic terms, but to feel, somewhere below language, that this is real, that this pattern exists in their world too, that the story a country tells about itself is always worth examining. This is not children's television thinking. This is the kind of nuanced historical and political understanding that most adult dramas do not bother with. And Avatar puts it into a cartoon about a 12-year-old boy with a flying bison. Section 8. The people nobody notices. He appears in Omashu with a cart full of cabbages. He appears in Ba Sing Se. He appears in multiple locations across the Earth Kingdom, somehow always arriving before or just after Team Avatar. His cart always finding its way into the precise wrong place at precisely the wrong moment. His cabbages are destroyed reliably every single time. And he reacts to each loss with a degree of anguish that suggests he has not yet learned the lesson that Avatar's world is trying to teach him. The cabbage merchant is not just a running gag. Running gags require only a repeated situation. The cabbage merchant is something more careful than that. He is a structural device. The Avatar world is enormous. It has 4 nations, multiple cities, hundreds of miles of territory, and an ongoing war that has displaced millions of people and reorganized the social fabric of every region the story passes through. The story follows Team Avatar through this world, and there is a risk in that. The risk that the world will feel like a series of locations that exist only to serve the story, that spring into existence when the characters arrive and stop mattering the moment they leave. The Cabbage Merchant is one of the show's solutions to this problem. He establishes, through his ridiculous persistence, that the world is moving while the story is not looking. That other people are traveling these same roads for their own reasons, running their own small, desperate errands, living inside their own stories that have nothing to do with the Avatar. His repeated appearances across the Earth Kingdom are the show's way of saying, ordinary life is happening here. People are trying to sell things. People are traveling. People have plans. People get unlucky. Jet's freedom fighters tell a similar story with more weight. Jet is charismatic and dangerous and genuinely believes that he is fighting for justice. His group of orphaned child rebels living in the trees of an Earth Kingdom forest is based, quite directly, on the historical reality of child soldiers, children who have lost everything to a war and been handed weapons by adults who tell them this is the only way. The show does not romanticize Jet. It presents him sympathetically enough that Katara is drawn to him, and then it reveals, unflinchingly, that he is willing to flood a village full of Fire Nation civilians, including people who have nothing to do with the war, in order to harm the soldiers stationed there. He draws a line of acceptable losses that the show refuses to accept. This is what makes Jet such a genuinely difficult character. He is not wrong that the Fire Nation has done terrible things. He is not wrong that ordinary people suffer in wars. But his response to injustice has become its own form of injustice, and the show does not let him off the hook for this. His arc does not end in redemption. It ends in Ba Sing Se, brainwashed, and then in a death that the show deliberately leaves ambiguous. Toph senses what has happened. The camera does not show you. The characters in the audience of the Ember Island Players Play say the exact words that the audience at home was saying. It was really unclear. The ambiguity was deliberate. The show wanted Jet's death to feel the way death in a war feels when you are not right next to it. Uncertain. Not quite confirmed. Something that you register with a cold feeling in your stomach and then find yourself unable to stop thinking about. Suki, the leader of the Kyoshi warriors, carries a detail that the show handles with unusual restraint. She is captured by Azula and imprisoned at the Boiling Rock, the Fire Nation's maximum security volcanic island prison. She is held there for the better part of a year, roughly 20 episodes of story time, during which the show does not cut to her or show what is happening. When she is finally rescued, she is different, harder, more economical with words. The warmth is still there, but it sits behind something protective. The show never explains what happened during those months at the Boiling Rock. It trusts the audience to understand that prison is prison, that extended captivity in a volcanic crater does not leave people unchanged, and that the audience does not need to be shown what they can imagine. This is an act of respect. Respect for Suki's dignity as a character. Respect for the audience's ability to understand suffering without being shown its details. And, quietly, respect for the real experiences of real people who have survived captivity and would not want those experiences turned into entertainment. The Foggy Swamp Tribe are another group of people the story notices in passing, who reward serious attention. They are water tribe benders who have lived in a swamp deep in the Earth Kingdom for so long that they have diverged entirely from their polar cousins, culturally, spiritually, and in their approach to their bending. They bend the water inside plants. They move vines and roots as if they were limbs. The show introduces this subset of water bending and never names it, never labels it as plant bending or specifies what it is. It simply shows you waterbenders who have adapted to their environment by discovering new possibilities in their element. And this plant bending, shown in Book 2 without fanfare, is a conceptual stepping stone. If you can bend the water inside a vine, then you can bend the water inside anything that contains water, which leads a full season later to Hama and the terrible discovery of bloodbending. The Foggy Swamp Tribe is not just an interesting cultural variant. They are a philosophical hint, planted early, that the rules of bending are larger than any of the characters yet understand. There is a detail that runs quietly through the entire series that most people never consciously register. The world map of the Avatar universe is not arbitrary. The four nations are arranged in a configuration that corresponds to the Chinese concept of the four cardinal directions and their associated elements. Water at the poles, north and south, corresponding to the cold extremes. Earth in the largest central landmass, occupying the stable middle. fire on an archipelago to the west, volcanic islands that reflect the geological truth that fire comes from beneath the ground, air at the four corners of the world, in the highest and most remote places, because air belongs to height and remoteness and the space above everything else. The geography follows the philosophy. It was designed this way, deliberately, so that when a character travels from the water tribe to the earth kingdom, they are not just moving across a map. They are moving from cold to warm, from scarcity to abundance, from the margin to the center. The geography of the world encodes the cultural relationships between its nations. And because it does, travel in Avatar always feels like it means something. The physical journey and the thematic journey are mapped onto the same coordinates. The show was storyboarded in the United States and animated primarily in South Korea. This is standard practice for American animation. What was not standard was the level of creative control maintained across that pipeline. Detailed storyboards with specific notes on character acting, lighting, camera angles, and emotional beats were sent to the Korean studios, not because the creators did not trust the Korean animators, but because they had built a visual language so precise that maintaining it required detailed communication. The Korean animators who worked on Avatar were not just executing instructions. They were interpreting a vision communicated with unusual clarity and specificity. The results speak for themselves in the consistency of visual quality across 3 seasons and 61 episodes. Sokka is perhaps the most persistently underestimated person the story pays attention to. In a show about bending, he is the non-bender, and this is treated, especially by other characters within the show, as a deficit. He is often seen as the comic relief, and he is genuinely funny, but the comedy is a surface that sits above a mind of genuine tactical sophistication. His plan for the Day of Black Sun invasion is a real military operation. It has a timeline, supply lines, diversionary tactics, contingencies. His plan to destroy the Fire Nation's airship fleet in the finale involves coordinating simultaneous actions across multiple teams with no communication infrastructure. These are not simple heroics. They are strategy. The show builds Sokka's intelligence deliberately, hiding it inside his jokes and his self-doubt, revealing it when the stakes are highest and the people around him need someone to think clearly. His arc is the most human arc in the show because it is about learning to believe that you matter in a world that seems to require superhuman ability to matter. Most people do not have superpowers. Most people navigate the same question Sokka does. How do you contribute to something larger than yourself when you have only ordinary human capability? The show's answer is that the ordinary human capability, strategy and humor, and leadership and love is not less valuable than fire. It is different valuable. Section 9. The deaths the show could not show. Avatar. The Last Airbender aired on Nickelodeon. This is a fact with consequences. Nickelodeon had content restrictions in 2005, specifically around depictions of death, that constrained what the show could show on screen. Most shows working under similar constraints simply avoid death altogether, keeping the stakes abstract. Avatar found another way. It developed an extraordinary range of techniques for conveying death without depicting it, and the variety and creativity of those techniques is itself a kind of artistry. Jet dies in the crystal catacombs beneath Ba Sing Se in Book 2. You know this because Toph says so. She feels the stillness through her seismic sense, the specific quality of Earth that used to have a living heartbeat and no longer does. But the camera is not there when it happens. The audience receives the information the same way it would receive it in real life, secondhand, through someone else's perception, having to trust that what they are being told is true. This is more sophisticated than showing a body. It puts you inside the uncertainty of loss. Jet's death becomes famous specifically because of its ambiguity. The Ember Island Players episode acknowledges this directly. The play's version of Jet gives a theatrical death speech that is obviously artificial, and a character in the audience whispers that it was unclear whether Jet actually died. Another character responds that it was really unclear. This is the show talking to itself, acknowledging that the ambiguity was intentional, doing so through a meta-theatrical device that is both funny and genuinely strange. The show is having a conversation with its audience's confusion about a moment from 2 seasons ago. Zuko's grandfather, Avatar Roku, dies in a volcanic eruption during a flashback in Book 2. His death is shown through the eruption itself, the lava, and the ash, and the impossibility of escape. His dragon, Fang, chooses to stay. The specific choice Fang makes, to remain with his partner rather than flee, is depicted in a brief and quiet shot that carries enormous weight. The animal's loyalty unto death is more affecting than a human death scene would have been, because it requires no words and no dramatic camera work. It is simply a creature choosing, and then the ash falling. Yue's death in the Book 1 finale is handled as transformation. She does not die in the conventional sense. She gives her life force back to the moon spirit, re-merging with the power that originally gave her life. Her body fades, and then the moon reappears, and the light over the North Pole is not ordinary moonlight. It has a particular quality of presence, of recognition, of something conscious looking down. The show suggests that Yue has not ended but changed state, that she is still there in a form that the story does not have complete language for. Combustion Man, the assassin Ozai sends to kill Aang in Book 3, dies from a misfire of his own bending, an explosion that the camera shows briefly and does not dwell on. It is handled like the death of a force of nature rather than a person, because that is how the show treated him. He was never given enough character to feel like a person. He was a function, and his end is treated with the same functional brevity. There is one dimension of Avatar's approach to loss and weight that sits adjacent to the music but is not quite the same thing. It is the show's use of silence. Avatar uses silence more deliberately than almost any other animated series in existence. Most animation fills every beat with something, score or sound effect or incidental ambient noise. Avatar learned to stop. When Aang finds the skeleton of Monk Yatso in the Southern Air Temple, surrounded by the ash and the evidence of a final stand against Fire Nation soldiers, the music drops completely. What remains is only the ambient sound of the temple and Aang's breakdown beginning. The silence makes the moment enormous. It gives the grief room to exist without being told what to feel by the orchestra. When Zuko, during the Day of Black Sun invasion, redirects Ozai's lightning and then walks away from his father toward the exit tunnel, there is a moment of near total silence that follows his movement. The music that had been building under the confrontation stops, and you hear footsteps. That is all. A young man walking away from the father who burned his face and sent him into exile, and this is what it sounds like. Footsteps. The absence of music is the presence of everything else. When Katara finds the man who killed her mother and holds him at her mercy and chooses, after a long moment, not to kill him, the silence in that beat is so complete and so deliberate that it becomes a kind of sound in itself. The quietness is the sound of a person deciding who they are going to be. No music is needed. No music would be appropriate. The decision is too personal for accompaniment. Zuckerman and the production team made these choices during the animatic stage of each episode. They were built into the structure before the composer received the footage. The silence was always part of the score. Its absence was composed. And the sound design itself deserves its own conversation. Benjamin Wynn, Zuckerman's partner in the track team, was responsible for the ambient sound of the Avatar world, the specific quality of each element's sound. Waterbending has a liquid flowing quality built from recordings of actual water that were processed and layered and manipulated. The sound of Katara pulling water from a river is not a stock sound effect. It is water, recorded, redesigned to carry the particular quality of something being moved by intention rather than gravity. Earthbending uses the heavy percussive sounds of stone and gravel, impacts that carry real physical weight. When Toph stamps the earth and a pillar rises, the sound of that rising is geological, like tectonic movement compressed into a single second. Firebending uses the sounds of gas, ignition, and furnace blasts, and the crackling roar of open flame, but shaped in time to match the specific intensity of each individual fire. A small defensive flame sounds different from Zuko's full attack mode, which sounds different again from Azula's blue fire, which carries a higher, sharper quality in its crackle that matches its hotter burning temperature. Airbending is the most complex sound design challenge in the show because air is invisible. You cannot record the visual equivalent of what you are hearing. Wynn built the airbending sounds from wind recordings that were processed to have a slightly musical quality, a tonal dimension that suggests intentionality rather than weather. The air in Avatar is not just moving, it is being moved by someone. And the sound reflects this distinction in ways that the visual design cannot achieve alone. And there is one more sound detail that very few people ever register consciously but everyone feels. A gentle waterbending motion sounds different from an aggressive one. The same element, bent by the same person, produces a different acoustic quality depending on the emotion behind it. A desperate firebending strike sounds different from a controlled one. The sound design tracks the character's internal state through the quality of their bending sound, not just its visual representation. This is another layer of emotional information that operates below conscious awareness and above the threshold of perception. All of these deaths are felt. None of them are shown in the way that a live-action drama would show them. And the result is that the audience often carries more uncertainty and more imagination to these moments than they would if given clear visual information. The deaths in Avatar linger not because they are traumatic images, but because they are incomplete information. The mind fills in what the screen does not show. The death that is not a death but feels like one is Aang's experience of the air nomad genocide. He did not witness it. He was in the ice. He woke up to discover that everyone he had ever known was gone, that the world had had 100 years to mourn them and move on, and that he was the last, standing in an empty temple, alone with the wind. The show handles his trauma from this, not with a single cathartic scene but with consistency over 3 seasons. Aang has nightmares. He avoids talking about the air nomads directly. He is triggered by specific stimuli: the sound of a singing bowl, the architecture of a temple, the presence of someone who reminds him of a teacher. He oscillates between numbness and grief that comes crashing through without warning. This is how real trauma works, not as a single dramatic breakdown that leads to healing, but as a pattern that recurs, that softens over time but does not disappear, that shapes the person around it in ways they sometimes do not even recognize. The show depicts this without clinical language, without explaining it, without ever using the word trauma. It just shows you what it looks like to carry a catastrophic loss through your days and still find reasons to be generous and playful and full of life. And then there is the death that is not in the show at all, but is present in every scene of the show's later seasons. Mako Iwamatsu. He died on the 21st of July 2006 from esophageal cancer at 72 years old. He had voiced Iroh through Book 1 and Book 2, and the recording of Leaves from the Vine, the song Iroh sings in the Tales of Ba Sing Se, was among his final recording sessions for the show. The dedication card at the end of that episode, in honor of Mako, is simple enough to break your heart with its simplicity. Greg Baldwin, who took over the role for Book 3 and The Legend of Korra, has said publicly that he will not perform Leaves from the Vine. Not because he cannot, but because it is Mako's song. It belongs to a specific performance by a specific human being at a specific moment in his life and the world's life. To reproduce it would be to replace something irreplaceable with a copy. Baldwin understood this without needing it to be explained. And his refusal is, in its quiet way, as much an act of love for the character and the show as anything in the script. Iroh's wisdom in the show, his quality of having survived loss and come through it, still capable of tenderness, still capable of sitting with a stranger and sharing a cup of tea, comes partly from Mako's specific understanding of age and of what it means to have lived long enough to have lost a great deal. The character and the actor held the same knowledge, and the scenes they shared are, because of this, some of the most genuinely true things in the show. Death in Avatar is present everywhere, felt everywhere, and almost never visible. This is the show's most profound formal achievement, making loss an atmosphere rather than an event, so that it permeates every scene without ever dominating one. Section 10. The ending that was always there? The series finale of Avatar, The Last Airbender, aired on the 19th of July, 2008, approximately 3.5 years after the premiere. It was planned as a 3-part story that expanded into 4 when the creators realized they had more material than would fit into the allotted time. The 4 parts, produced under the collective title Sozin's Comet, aired as a single 2-hour television film, making it one of the longest animated series finales ever produced for American television at that time. The runtime is 92 minutes. It required 3 directors: Ethan Spalding for Part 1, Giancarlo Volpe for Part 2, and Joaquim dos Santos for Parts 3 and 4. The writing credits include Michael DiMartino, Brian Konietzko, and Aaron Ehaus, the show's head writer, who had shepherded the narrative through all 3 seasons. For the finale, the show was given, for the first time, live string players to record with. Jeremy Zuckerman's score for those 4 episodes is different from the rest of the series, not just because the stakes are different, but because the sound is different. The strings in Aang's fight with Ozai fall slightly out of standard tuning, a choice Zuckerman made deliberately to create a quality of cosmic wrongness, of the world tilting on its axis as 2 forces this large meet each other. The ending was known from the beginning. The creators had always planned a three-season story with a predetermined conclusion. Aang would defeat Ozai. Zuko would join Team Avatar. The comet would come. This structural certainty is what made Avatar's deeper planning possible. Because the creators knew where they were going, they could plant seeds in Episode 3 that would bloom in Episode 60. They could introduce a lion turtle in a scroll in Book 2 and know that it would matter in the finale. They could establish the moon's phases in Book 1 and have the full moon at the Siege of the North be the payoff of a continuous lunar cycle. The finale resolves every major character arc with a specificity that feels earned because it is earned. Every resolution corresponds exactly to the question that character's arc was asking. Aang's question was, how do you remain who you are when the world demands you become something else? The answer the finale gives is energy bending, a technique that allows him to remove Ozai's firebending without killing him, preserving both Ozai's life and Aang's identity. The Avatar does not become a killer. He does not compromise his air nomad heritage. He finds a third option, which is what the show was always arguing that wisdom is. Not the ability to choose between the options presented, but the ability to perceive options that were not yet visible. Zuko's question was, what does it mean to be honorable? The finale gives him the answer in action rather than words. He takes a lightning bolt meant for Katara. He chooses the right side at the moment it costs him everything. And then he becomes Fire Lord, and his first act is to end the war his grandfather started. The honor he spent 3 seasons searching for turns out to have been available to him all along. It was never something that could be given by his father. It was something he either did or didn't do, independent of recognition. Katara's question was about power and its relationship to love. By the finale, she is the most skilled waterbender alive outside of the Northern Masters, and in her final battle with Azula, she defeats her not through superior force but through strategy, turning Azula's own attack against her, using waterbending's fundamental philosophy of redirection. The question her arc posed was whether you have to become cold and tactical to be powerful, and the answer the finale gives is that her specific kind of power, rooted in care and connection, is not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength that has its own specific applications. Sokka, whose question was whether a person without superpowers can matter in a world defined by them, leads the destruction of the Fire Nation airship fleet. He coordinates, he plans, he executes, and at the critical moment he sacrifices his meteorite sword and Suki's freedom to save Toph. His ending is not a single heroic moment. It is a series of decisions, each one small and practical, that collectively save the day. This is what his arc was building toward, not recognition as a hero but the quiet, accumulating evidence that his particular kind of intelligence is as valuable as any element. Toph's question was about independence and whether strength requires isolation. Her finale arc involves using her metal bending to breach the hull of an airship that no other earthbender could have bent. Something only she can do, that no one who trained her taught her, that came from her willingness to think outside the rules of her own element. And the meteorite bracelet on her wrist, the one Sokka made for her from the leftover material after forging his sword, the one she has worn since he gave it to her and the show has never pointed at, catches the light in one of those episodes. Iroh's question was about redemption, whether a man who helped start a war can atone for it. His finale arc involves leading the Order of the White Lotus to retake Ba Sing Se from the Fire Nation forces that have occupied it since the Book 2 finale. He does not retake it through military superiority. He leads old men and masters, people who have spent years playing a board game in tea shops, back into the city they were exiled from, and they take it back because they understand what it was worth. The Jasmine Dragon, the tea shop Iroh opens in Ba Sing Se at the end, is named for a real type of Chinese green tea, Jasmine Dragon Pearl, associated with patience and refinement, and the appreciation of subtle pleasures. The name was chosen by the show because it reflects the character's values. Even the name of a fictional tea shop tells you who a person is. The finale's final image is a slow camera pullback from Aang and Katara on the balcony of the Jasmine Dragon. They have finally kissed, finally arrived at the thing that was between them for 61 episodes. The camera pulls back and keeps pulling back, widening to show the balcony, then the city, then the sky. The show is letting go of them. For 61 episodes, the camera has been close, following them into every battle and every heartbreak and every breakthrough. And now it steps back, releases them into the warmth of a setting sun, and says with its movement, "They will be fine. You can let them go now." The sunset is orange and warm and purple at the edges. Not triumphant, not mournful, settled. The color of something that has been resolved, not won. The show knew it was going to arrive here. It knew this image was waiting when it first drew the iceberg. The ending was always there, embedded in the beginning, and every hidden detail and every piece of real calligraphy and every carefully choreographed fighting form was working in service of this moment. Not this specific image, necessarily, but this specific feeling, the feeling of completion, of a world that was built with enough care to support everything placed on it, of a story that kept all of its promises. Section 11. The weight of small things. There are details in Avatar that do not fit neatly into any category, but that illuminate the show from specific angles that nothing else can reach. There are details in Avatar that exist in the spaces between the plot, in the margins of scenes that are officially about something else. The Ember Island Players episode, the Book 3 episode where the characters watch a play recapping their own adventures, is the show's most concentrated meditation on how stories get distorted in the retelling. The play gets almost everything wrong. It exaggerates, it mischaracterizes, it turns serious moments into farce. But it gets one thing conspicuously right. The play's version of Jet's death is ambiguous and confusing, with the actor lying motionless while saying reassuring things. A character in the audience whispers that they're not sure what just happened. Another says it was really unclear. The show is directly addressing its own most famous ambiguity. Jet's death was unclear in the original episode by design. The show made it unclear and then, in this meta-theatrical episode, acknowledged that it did so and affirmed that the ambiguity was intentional by having characters within the story express the exact confusion the audience had expressed. This is a show in conversation with its own viewers across the gap of 2 seasons. It knew you were confused. It remembered. It addressed it. The Order of the White Lotus is planted so quietly and so far in advance that most first-time viewers do not register it at all. Iroh plays Pai Sho throughout the show. He plays it in prison. He plays it with strangers in tea shops. He plays it whenever the opportunity arises, which is often, because Iroh turns every situation into an opportunity if there is a Pai Sho board nearby. The White Lotus tile, which becomes the signal of the Order, is visible in his games long before its significance is revealed. The Order itself is revealed only in the finale, when it becomes one of the 3 simultaneous plot threads of Sozin's Comet. These old masters reconquering Ba Sing Se. But its foundations were laid in Book 1 and never pointed at. This is the show's most extended act of patience in terms of setup. Something seeded in the first season paying off in the finale of the third. There is the fact that every hybrid animal in the Avatar world, the turtle ducks and the platypus bears and the saber-toothed moose lions, is played for comedy and also serves a genuine world-building function. The hybrids tell you that in this world, evolution took a different path. Species combined rather than diverged. The biology followed different rules. And the one animal that breaks the pattern, Bosco, the Earth King's pet bear who is just a regular bear, not a platypus bear or an armadillo bear, just a bear, is treated by every character as the strange one. The gang is confused and slightly disturbed by the existence of a normal bear. A bear that is simply a bear is the unusual thing. This inversion, where the familiar is the exotic, is one of the quietest jokes in the show and also one of the most philosophically precise. It tells you more about the Avatar world's relationship to your world than almost anything else. Your world is the strange alternate timeline. The Avatar world is the one where 2 things becoming one is the default. There is the fact that Sokka's boomerang, established in the very first episode as one of his few possessions from home, returns to him every time he throws it across all 3 seasons. This is not treated as magical or unusual within the show. It is just what Sokka's boomerang does. It comes back. And in the finale, during the airship battle, the boomerang is lost. It does not come back. For the first time in 61 episodes, something Sokka throws does not return. The show never addresses this loss. It does not cut to Sokka grieving the boomerang. It just happens, and then the scene moves on. But the boomerang has been such a consistent presence, such a reliable small symbol of Sokka's connection to home, that its loss carries weight precisely because the show refuses to dramatize it. Some losses are just losses. The boomerang is gone. Life continues. There is the fact that the show's number system is built around the number 4. 4 nations, 4 elements, 4 seasons, 4 directions. The number 4 in Chinese and Japanese culture is associated with death, because the words for 4 and death are near homophones in both Mandarin and Japanese. The Avatar world is built on the number of death and rebirth. The Avatar cycle is itself a cycle of death and return. This association was understood by the creators and built into the foundation of the world's structure. The 4 is not incidental. It is philosophical. There is the fact that every person who teaches Aang a new element teaches him in a way that reflects their own relationship to that element. Pakku teaches waterbending formally, with discipline and respect for tradition, because he is a product of the Northern Water Tribe's rigid social structure, and it takes Katara's challenge to make him reconsider what that structure costs. Toph teaches earthbending by throwing Aang off a cliff, because the essence of earthbending is learning to trust what is beneath you, and you cannot learn that without having the thing beneath you temporarily absent. The dragons Ran and Shaw teach firebending by demonstrating its original form, not the aggression and destruction that the Fire Nation has reduced it to, but fire as life energy, as creation and warmth and the force that precedes civilization. Each teacher is a specific answer to a specific philosophical question about their element. There is the fact that the show was built by two people with different and complementary skills who never confused their respective roles. Brian Konietzko was the artist. He thought in images. He saw the show. Michael DiMartino was the storyteller. He thought in structure and character and the patient architecture of long narrative arcs. Between them, they could see and feel the thing simultaneously, which is how the show's visual and narrative depth are so evenly matched. This is not a show where the art overwhelms the story or where the story outpaces the visual imagination. They are the same thing, made by two people who became, through years of creative partnership, something more capable together than either could be alone. There is the fact that Aang's relationship with his element is always present, even when he is not bending. His hair, when it finally grows in during Book 3's undercover sequence, changes him entirely. With hair, he looks like a different person. He looks like any ordinary kid. The air nomad markers, the shaved head, and the tattoos are covered. And the show asks its question through this: who is Aang when the markers of his identity are invisible? And the answer it gives, in scene after scene, is that Aang is still Aang. The values persist when the symbols are hidden. The compassion and the playfulness and the deep inability to be cruel are not stored in the tattoos. They are in him, unchanged by the length of his hair or the color of his robes. There is the fact that every episode title in Book 1 begins with the definite article the boy in the iceberg, the waterbending scroll, the blue spirit, the siege of the north. This naming convention gives Book 1 a particular quality, a storybook rhythm, as if each episode is a chapter in an old tale being told around a fire. Books 2 and 3 abandon this convention. Their titles become more varied, more fragmented, some direct and declarative, some evocative and strange. The Crossroads of Destiny, The Puppet Master, Sozin's Comet. The change in naming convention tracks the show's tonal shift, from the relative clarity and momentum of a children's adventure to the more complex, darker, more morally ambiguous territory of the later seasons. Even the naming of the episodes is in service of the story's arc. There is the fact that Aang's staff, his glider, functions as a biographical object across 3 seasons. In Book 1 and most of Book 2, the glider is his most constant companion after Appa, and it is the physical expression of his identity as an air nomad. When it is destroyed in the Book 2 finale, during the siege of Ba Sing Se, the loss is felt beyond the practical inconvenience of losing a vehicle. The boy who could fly is, for a time, grounded. The air nomad has lost the tool that connected him to the sky and to the physical tradition of his people. When he receives a new glider in Book 3, it is a different design, not identical to the original. Slightly different proportions, different details. The old glider belonged to the boy who was running away from being the Avatar. The new glider belongs to the young man who has decided to face it. The prop changed because the person changed. There is the fact that the show's 3-season arc maps onto a journey from winter to the peak of summer. Book 1 begins in the ice. The world is cold and the protagonists are just waking up. Book 2 passes through spring and summer, the world warming and greening as the group moves through the Earth Kingdom. Book 3 builds toward the hottest moment of the year, the day of the comet, the maximum intensity. And then the finale, after Ozai's defeat, after the comet has passed, arrives in what feels like the first mild evening after a long hot season. The world exhales, The temperature drops just slightly. You can breathe again. There is the fact that every piece of text is real, every fight is real, every instrument is real, every building is researched, every animal is a deliberate choice, every color is a decision, every camera angle on Zuko's face is a comment on his psychology, and the moon followed a consistent lunar cycle across 20 episodes. And a blind girl propped her feet up to sleep so the earth could not keep her awake. And a man sang a lullaby to his dead son 2 months before he died. And a boomerang came back every time, until it did not, and a 12-year-old boy had a map of spiritual energy tattooed across his body, and 2 fish swam in circles to hold the world together, and someone decided that the text in the background of a children's cartoon should be readable and meaningful and brushed by a real scholar who responded to the job offer within an hour. These are the things the show is made of. Not the plot, not the adventure. These small, particular, infinitely patient decisions made by people who believed, without reservation, that the details matter, that the things the audience cannot see are just as important as the things they can, that a world is only as real as the invisible work that holds it up. Section 12. The Gift of Attention. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. She meant the act of truly looking at something, of giving it the full weight of your awareness, unreservedly, without agenda. She meant that to see something clearly is an act of love. The creators of Avatar, The Last Airbender, paid attention to everything. They paid attention to the way a blind girl would sleep when her feet were her eyes. They paid attention to the difference between Hungar and southern praying mantis, and why one would work for the large, powerful earthbender, and the other for the small, sensitive one. They paid attention to the specific sounds of the duduk and the gusheng, and what those sounds would mean to a listener who had grown up with them. They paid attention to what propaganda actually looks like when it is woven into a city's architecture, when it is repeated in a classroom, when it is administered in darkness with a swinging light. They paid attention to grief. Not grief as a dramatic event, but grief as a condition, something that a person carries into every scene, that surfaces in unexpected moments, that never fully resolves. They paid attention to what it costs a child to carry 100 years of loss into every waking moment and still find the capacity to be generous. They paid attention to the difference between the truth that can be spoken and the truth that can only be felt. And they built the second kind of truth into the invisible layer of the show, into the calligraphy nobody could read, and the lunar cycle nobody was tracking, and the martial arts philosophy nobody was naming, so that the audience would absorb the truth without knowing they were being given it. This is the mechanism by which Avatar does what it does. It gives you more than you can consciously receive. It builds its world below the level of conscious attention and then trusts that the world will be felt, that the caring will be registered even when the care is invisible. There is something that happens when you spend a long time with a piece of work built with this level of care. It starts to feel like it knows you, not in a mystical sense, but in the practical sense that a world built deeply enough will contain something relevant to any person who enters it at any point in their life. The grief is there for the people who are grieving. The questions about identity are there for people who are mid-revision of themselves. The political clarity is there for people who are trying to understand the world they live in. The pure joy of Aang's somersaults through the air is there for people who just need to remember what delight feels like. The show does not become a different show for each person. It is one show, sufficiently large that each person finds a different room to stand in. This is not an accident. The creators built it this way through structural range, through the deliberate coexistence of comedy and tragedy, of children's wonder and adult political complexity, of action and stillness. They made a world big enough to hold different people at the same time. And because the world is internally consistent, because its rules apply to everyone within it equally, the different experiences of different viewers do not contradict each other. They coexist the way different rooms of a well-built house coexist, each with its own character, all part of the same structure. The children who watched Avatar in 2005 are now in their late 20s and early 30s. They grew up. They went through things. They had losses and confusions and long stretches of not knowing who they were. And many of them came back to the show. They rewatched it and found things they had not been able to find the first time. Because the first time they were children and now they are not. The philosophy was there, the sorrow was there, the complex moral reasoning about imperialism and complicity was there. The show had always been more than they could receive. Now they were large enough to receive more of it. This is the most remarkable thing about Avatar. It grows with its audience. Not because it changes, but because it was built deep enough that there is always more to encounter. The 6-year-old sees adventure, the 16-year-old sees philosophy, the 26-year-old sees craft, the 36-year-old sees all three at once and something else underneath them, something that does not have a clean name. The feeling of a world that was loved into existence. The feeling of people who cared so much about what they were making that they hired a calligrapher for the background text and a martial artist for the fighting animations and a composer who played the instruments himself in a small studio. Because the budget did not extend to a live ensemble. They cared about the calligraphy you cannot read, about the martial art you cannot name, about the moon phase you did not track, about the sleeping position of a blind girl that the show never pointed at, about the color of fire when the person bending it is losing her mind, about the way a scar catches the light when a camera is on the right side of a face, about the specific weight of a boomerang that always came back until it did not. All of it, every frame, every note, every brushstroke, built with the conviction that the audience deserves the best version of every frame, every sound, every character, every story. That conviction is the show's deepest hidden fact, the one that contains all the others, the one that explains why, 20 years after its creation, Avatar, The Last Airbender, does not fade, does not date, does not shrink into nostalgia or become a relic of a particular moment in animation history. It persists because it was built with care. And care, genuine attention paid to the truth of a thing, does not expire. The world is still there, still full of hidden details, still waiting for you to notice something new, still hiding more than any single viewing can extract, still doing what it has always done, which is to be richer than it needs to be, deeper than anyone expected, more true than a children's cartoon has any obligation to be. You have carried this world with you. Maybe since childhood, maybe since last year, maybe it found you exactly when you needed it. The world was built to do that, to find people at the right moment, because it is deep enough and true enough and careful enough to meet people wherever they are. Close your eyes if you like. Let the show play somewhere in the back of your mind, in that space where remembered stories live, the amber light of the North Pole, the green and vast walls of Ba Sing Se, the orange and purple of a sky bison crossing an impossible blue sky, a blind girl sleeping with her feet propped against a stone. The world is still there, and the people who built it loved you before they knew you. They loved you enough to get the calligraphy right. They loved you enough to track the moon. They loved you enough to make sure that when a 12-year-old boy ran away from everything and ended up in the ice, the place he landed was exactly the place where he was most needed. That is not an accident. Nothing in this show is an accident. And that is the last hidden fact, that the care was always love in a different form, that the work nobody saw was done for the sake of people who would never know it was there. You are one of those people. And tonight, the show is the same show it was when it first found you, or when you first found it, whichever direction that encounter happened in. The ice is still there. The boy is still inside it. The world is still broken and beautiful in equal measure, still waiting for someone patient enough and brave enough and strange enough to hold all four elements at once and figure out how to use them for something other than war. And somewhere in that story is a piece of you that recognized something the first time you watched it. A feeling that this is real, that this matters, that the care inside it is pointing at something true about how the world could be if the people making it believed, all the way down, that the invisible work is the most important work. You are one of those people. And tonight, wherever you are, however far from wherever you started, the world of Avatar is holding you the same way it has always held you, with everything it has got, which, as it turns out, is quite a lot. If this video helped you wind down tonight, a like and a subscribe goes further than you might think. It is how this channel keeps making content like this, long and slow and built with care. And drop a comment below, I read them all. What is your single favorite hidden detail in Avatar? Or just tell me you made it to the end. That means something. Rest well. The morning will come when it comes.